It is November 3rd, 2024, and tensions are soaring in the Middle East as Tehran is increasing its warnings more than 1 week after an Israeli attack on Iranian soil, and as the U.S. is increasing its military presence in the region, which is also, of course, increasing the chances that the U.S. could get dragged even further into this expanding regional conflict. All of this as Israel continues to kill civilians from Gaza to Lebanon because of course it is. So, what does all of this mean and where could we be headed? Well, let's get into it. And let's start with Iran, as the nation's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, released a video statement on Saturday in which he said, quote, "The enemies, whether the Zionist regime or the United States of America, will definitively receive a crushing response to what they are doing to Iran and the Iranian nation and to the resistance front." So he's not just talking about Israel and their attack on Iranian soil back on October 26, when they specifically targeted military sites and killed at least 3 army personnel and 1 civilian. No, he's also expanding it to include everything that Israel is doing, not just to Iran, but to the entire axis of resistance, right? Taking into account Hezbollah and Hamas and Ansar Allah and Yemen and on in the region. And he's also including the United States. It's yet another reminder that for the people of Palestine and Lebanon and Iraq and Syria and Yemen, they are well aware of Washington's involvement in Israel's crimes. In fact, they know that without the US and its support, Netanyahu and his fellow war criminals would not have a leg to stand on here. And speaking of that support coming from the US, well, they're only continuing to increase the support that they are providing to Israel, as the Pentagon announced on Friday that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has ordered several B-52 Stratofortress bomber aircraft, a squadron of fighter jets, tank aircraft, and Navy destroyers to deploy to the Middle East. According to Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder, Austin's latest order shows the United States, quote, "capability to deploy worldwide on short notice to meet evolving national security threats." He said Austin continues to make clear that should Iran, its partners, or its proxies use this moment to target American personnel or interest in the region, that the United States will take every measure necessary to defend our people. And I specifically take issue with that statement because the US acts as though Israel is our national security, right? They act like any consequences for Israel's actions, oh, we have to jump in and stop that because that would be harming our national security. You can't just send around 43,000 troops to a region and then claim that any sort of targeting of them is somehow national security. That's not how this works. The US should just be honest about it and say that it is jumping in to protect its genocidal buddy from facing any sort of consequences for their actions in the region, for the crimes, for the massacres, attacks, and targeted assassinations that they are carrying out all across the region. And there's another important angle to all of this, because in times like this, the US will claim that it's just sending Israel military aid, right? It's just sending weapons and ammunition, providing public and political support. But then, as though the crimes that Israel commits are completely removed from anything that the US is involved with, as if the US couldn't do anything to stop it, which is why we're watching the US do literally nothing to stop any of Israel's crimes. And yes, I say that despite the fact that last month, the Biden administration had Secretary of State Antony Blinken send a strongly worded letter to Israel in which they called on them to allow more humanitarian aid trucks into Gaza within the next 30 days and said that if they didn't, that it could affect the supply of weapons coming from the US. See, they never say they're going to cut them off completely. They just say, oh, it could have an effect on those weapons, as if to say, hey, we really need you to get some more food into the Palestinians so that they're not quite as starving as they would otherwise have been when you kill them with the weapons that we also sent you. And now the trusty anonymous US officials quoted by Axios are saying that the Biden administration is really putting on the pressure for real this time, as it's becoming clear that Israel isn't even trying to meet that November 13th deadline. And in fact, they're just creating more of a humanitarian crisis. Because as history has taught us, anytime Israel is told to do something like to stop killing so many Palestinians or to, do everything in their power to prevent genocide from happening in the Gaza Strip, they seem to almost intentionally do the exact opposite. No, let me rephrase that. They do the exact opposite, right? They take those warnings, they take those statements and they turn them into, okay, how many Palestinians can we kill now in this period of time that we've been told not to kill them or to pull back or to allow more humanitarian aid in? They do the exact opposite of whatever they're told. And why would they do what they're told? Who is actually enforcing any kind of requirements for Israel right now? These are just empty orders of, prevent genocide or stop killing so many Palestinians or allow humanitarian aid trucks in. There is no sort of muscle behind those words. So why would Israel listen? So if Israel isn't increasing the flow of humanitarian aid trucks into Gaza, and if it's doing the exact opposite of what it has been told, then what does that look like today? Oh, well, 972 magazine has a new report out which details it exactly. It dives into the current situation, the current siege that Israel is carrying out on the Palestinians in northern Gaza. And I would encourage you all to go read it for yourselves. But basically, to sum up a few key points from it. This report notes that the situation in northern Gaza is significantly worse than what's being reported. Because up until this point, there's been a lot of talk about this so-called general's plan, which is basically to say that there are an estimated up to 400,000 Palestinians still in the northern half of Gaza. Yes, Israel has told them to flee for the last year now, and that Israel is specifically implementing the general's plan in which they tell these remaining hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to flee to the southern half of Gaza. And if they don't comply, then they are treated as enemy combatants. But as this report notes, that's not what is happening. For those who do attempt to leave, they are being targeted and shot by Israeli forces. The result is that many of them are trapped and waiting to either be killed or to starve to death because Israel has cut off all food, water, and medicine. As the report notes, since the Israeli army began its operation in northern Gaza, it has killed over 1,000 Palestinians. The Israeli Air Force usually bombs at night while the victims are sleeping, slaughtering entire families in their homes and making it more difficult to evacuate the wounded. And as of October 24th, rescue services announced that the intensity of the bombardment left them with no choice but to cease all operations in the besieged areas. And the individual stories that are included in this report are just beyond belief. I mean, they had stories of a child who was injured in an airstrike who was crying out for help. And so naturally, this crowd of people, they come to find the child. They're trying to help it, to get it out of the rubble. And then what does Israel do? They bomb that exact same spot again. And I know that they've done this numerous times. I know that this is almost just protocol for them, but it's like Israel right now is carrying out the extermination of the northern half of the Gaza Strip. And no one's really talking about it. I mean, everyone has just kind of accepted this idea that, okay, yeah, Israel's going to do that to the Palestinians. It's like, this is happening under our watch. This is happening with the help of the US. We have two top contenders for the presidency running in an election race coming up on Tuesday, and yet they don't even care. They're not even attempting to pay lip service to the Palestinians or say like, oh, this is so bad. Instead, they give some variation of, oh, but October 7th, as if an attack that was carried out by an occupied people against their occupying force, as if that somehow justifies genocide of the occupied people. And newsflash, it doesn't. But I know that at the same time, it's not like international law is really being enforced here whatsoever right now. Now, when it comes to the death toll, as reports have also noted, on Sunday alone, Israeli attacks on Gaza killed at least 35 people, including 17 in the north. That's as UNICEF condemned Israel's indiscriminate attacks on the Gaza Strip, noting that more than 50 children were killed in attacks on the Jabalia refugee camp in the last 48 hours. Israel is also openly killing civilians by the dozens over in Lebanon, a sovereign nation that apparently has no protection whatsoever under international law. And we've gotten a chance to see some of these satellite images, specifically from Planet Labs, which show the destruction in southern Lebanon from September 26th to October 24th. That's where nearly a dozen villages have been destroyed by Israel near the border. So far, reports have estimated that Israel has killed nearly 2,000 people in Lebanon since September 23rd. And I know that there's been some back and forth about the possibility of ceasefire talks. I have yet to see any legitimate willingness from Israel to engage in any kind of meaningful ceasefire talks or to show that they would even agree to any kind of a truce. That's been the case with Gaza for months now. And I think it's notable because the West tends to act as though, oh, it's on Hamas or it's on Hezbollah. They have to be the ones to agree to this ceasefire deal. And yet Israel's over here with Netanyahu exactly earlier today saying, quote, I want to be clear, with or without an agreement, the key to restoring peace and stability in the north is first and foremost to push Hezbollah back beyond the Litani River. Second, to target any attempt to rearm. And thirdly, to respond firmly to any action taken against us. Now, Netanyahu made that statement while he was visiting Israeli troops on the border with Lebanon on Sunday. And he made it very clear that, look, no matter what sort of deal is made, right, even if there's an agreement, that his goals are still his goals. And that is still what Israel is going to pursue, which essentially means more dead Lebanese civilians at the end of the day. And again, no one on the international stage is stepping in to do anything here. Now, you may be wondering, when Netanyahu was making a statement like that, is he directing it towards the West, right? To the current Biden administration, to whoever wins the upcoming election? Well, no, in this case, I think it was also directed towards his own generals, as you've got reports noting, specifically from Israeli media, noting that IDF chief Herzi Halevi and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have both increased their pressure on Netanyahu to reach a ceasefire deal with Hamas, which would return the remaining 101 living and dead Israeli hostages. So we know what Israel is likely to continue to do. They're going to continue to kill civilians from Gaza to Lebanon. They're probably going to continue on with these targeted assassinations because they want to act as though they are accomplishing something by going after the political leaders within Hamas and Hezbollah. And they're also going to wait for the upcoming US election to see who wins. And now I don't say that as if a Trump versus Harris, looking at just those two candidates, as if they will lead to any sort of meaningful differences towards US policy when it comes to Israel, right? Because it's expected that because Trump is buddy-buddy with Netanyahu, because of the statements that he's made about the Palestinians and just completely degrading them, it's expected that Trump is going to come in and say, Netanyahu, do whatever you want, basically finish the genocide, in other words. And then I guess it's also expected that Harris is going to pay a little bit more lip service to the Palestinians, but I honestly don't know that that would even be the case. I mean, I think she's tried to be a bit more, shall we say, diplomatic, if you can even use that word to describe what's going on right now, when she's been talking about the Palestinians in recent months, just because she doesn't want to be the next Genocide Joe. But at the same time, when it comes to Harris and her policies, I see no evidence that she would necessarily be all that different than Trump. I mean, every single time she's asked about the Palestinians or anything related to Israel, she just goes on some sort of but October 7th rant, as if all of this is justified. And I am considering making a more in-depth video kind of looking at Trump versus Harris and their statements that they've made on the Middle East and just kind of what we could and should expect from them depending on who wins the upcoming election. But I think it's very clear when you look at these two candidates, and it's a reminder, neither one of them is going to put any kind of arms embargo on Israel or is going to force Israel to pull back in any way from its killing of civilians in the region. And that is very telling. So we know what Israel is going to do. We know what the US is going to do. Right now, the biggest question is, what is Iran going to do? Because I think it's very telling that we are in a position right now where we have Iran's supreme leader really ramping up his warnings and increasing his rhetoric. Because before, when it came to the attack that was carried out by Israel, you had Iran noting that it left limited damage. And you had Iran's supreme leader in this position where he was saying, look, it shouldn't be exaggerated and it also should not be downplayed. Now you have him in a position where he's promising a crushing response, and he's including both Israel and the US in that statement. So, why could that be? Well, according to anonymous Israeli officials, who again are speaking to Axios, they say that Israeli intelligence suggests that Iran is preparing to launch a reprisal attack on Israel from Iraqi territory in the coming days, and that it could happen before the November 5th US presidential election. Now, of course, these are notably anonymous Israeli officials speaking about Israeli intelligence, so we don't have any kind of confirmation from Iran about what they will do, what they could do, but it does bring us back to the current situation in the region and the fact that you have the US in this position where it has so many troops all around, right? An estimated 43,000 troops in the region. They are all just sitting ducks at this point. I mean, if you see an escalation in attacks, if that's coming from militias within Iraq, they could also target US troops in the region. And if that happens, right, if we get to this point where we're looking at the possibility of an even more expansive conflict in the region than we already have, well, I guess the question would be, what would Joe Biden do? We obviously know that he's not running the government right now. So then the question becomes, what would Antony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, and Jake Sullivan do? But it also becomes, what would a future Harris versus Trump do? And I think that that is something that is being really kind of calculated in right now, right? As we have 2 days until the upcoming election, we're looking at this possibility that you have a Trump administration where he comes in, he's already been incredibly hostile towards Iran. You have the possibility of him coming back in, but you also have Kamala Harris, who also has been hostile in her statements towards Iran and indicated that there would be some sort of a response coming from the US for whatever Iran does if US troops are targeted. So I think that those are things to certainly keep in mind as we continue to kind of watch Iran, as we have this waiting period here and we wait to see what's going to happen next. We have a current situation where when Iran carried out its October 1st retaliation for a variety of Israeli attacks and targeted assassinations, you had Iran then warning and saying, hey, if you attack us, if you respond, we will keep expanding this conflict, right? It's going to keep getting worse and worse when it comes to our future retaliations. Then you have Israel with its anonymous reports coming out saying, oh, we could target nuclear sites or economic sites within Iran the next time we target them. And the Western media loves to kind of condense this into just some sort of tit for tat, as if it's just Israel and Iran fighting back and forth. But I think we have to remember here that the reason that we are in the place that we are in right now is because of the fact that, again, Israel is carrying out an all-out genocide of the Palestinian people. They are carrying out these atrocities in northern Gaza that are somehow even worse than what they've been doing to the Palestinians over the last more than 1 year now, right? It's continuing to get even worse. These atrocities are continuing to expand into Lebanon. And so, yes, you have this resistance in the region that is fighting back against Israel, but that is still trying to keep the focus on the Palestinian people. And it's also interesting too, because every time I do a video on this topic, I usually get a comment or two, or maybe more than that, from people who say something along the lines of, oh, well, Iran should hit back much harder, or Hezbollah should hit back harder. And it's fascinating to me to kind of watch the back and forth here, watch truly the balancing act that so many of these parties are being forced to do, and the situation that they're in, as you have Israel in this situation where I do believe it is authoring its own eventual destruction at this point. And that may not come about for years, right? It's not going to come about tomorrow, but the current position that Israel is in, even though so many in the region are kind of sitting back and they are allowing the genocide of the Palestinians, I do think that it is making them look at Israel in a different way. And it's making them realize, and this is kind of a picture too of what we've seen with everything that the US has done to Russia, and that, you have all these countries around the world that are looking around going, well, wait a second. We're watching as the US is, making Russia the most sanctioned nation in the world, trying to destroy Russia's economy. If they're going to do that to Russia, then what's to stop them from eventually doing that to me? And so I think as you have Israel in this position where they're not just targeting the Palestinians, they're now openly targeting the Lebanese civilians, targeting a sovereign nation. You've got the region in a situation where I would hope that just about now they are realizing that they eventually need to respond, because Israel is not going to just stop with the Palestinians or the Lebanese. It's going to get increasingly more powerful, increasingly more brazen in each of the attacks that it carries out. And I do think that it will have a very long lasting effect on Israel and the position that it is in on the world stage. And I think that the US will also be impacted, because we have to remember that everyone knows just how involved the US is here. Everyone knows that Israel is completely reliant on the US for its continued survival. And it's truly fascinating to live in the current time that we do, because it's a reminder to me, especially every time I look at the Western media and what they're saying, to be here in this place of being able to say, okay, the US looks like it is on a collision course to World War III, and it's not on the right side here, right? It's not on the right side of the history when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Palestine or Russia and Ukraine. And it's the establishment media that jump in and that claim, well, oh, if you are, speaking out for the Palestinians or speaking out for the Iranians, then you must be wanting Iran to quote unquote win, in the same way that they do it with Ukraine, where they're going, okay, if you're questioning where Russia is right now or what the true state of the war is, then you are somehow not wanting Ukraine to win. It's a reminder that when it comes to Western officials and Western media alike, it feels like we are living in this backwards world where, in order to find out the truth, you almost have to look at the exact opposite of what they have to say. And no matter what happens on election day, no matter where things go from here, or how tensions escalate in the Middle East, or even if there is some sort of a ceasefire agreement, I think it's very clear that people like Netanyahu have made it known exactly what their goals are. And it will be important to look to see who continues to be within the US government, because there are swamp creatures from the Democrats, Republicans, you name it, who always seem to hang around and whose goals when it comes to US foreign policy never seem to change. And at the end of the day, that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can find new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also find Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can chime in on weekly polls and Q&As. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.